Dorothy trusted her children blindly and paid the ultimate price. Deceived and stripped of her fortune, she was left with nothing. Her betrayers celebrate, convinced they've won. But in the shadows, someone is watching. Emily, her 10-year-old granddaughter. What can a child possibly do against such a carefully planned scheme? The answer comes at the most unexpected moment, when the truth explodes in front of everyone, exposing the betrayal in the most shocking way. Want to know what happened? Watch until the end and don't miss this story full of emotions and unexpected twists. Let us know where you're watching from and subscribe for more thrilling stories. Dorothy Reynolds had spent a lifetime building her fortune. She wasn't born into wealth, she earned it. As a young woman, she worked tirelessly, running a small but thriving family business alongside her late husband. They had started with nothing but determination and a belief that hard work would pay off. And it did. By the time Dorothy reached her 70s, she had everything she had ever dreamed of: a beautiful home, a generous savings account, and most importantly, a family she adored. Her 3 children, Mark, Laura, and James, had grown up with every advantage. She had given them the best education, supported them through every challenge, and ensured they never went without. But the years had made Dorothy trust too easily. She believed that love and loyalty ran deeper than greed. And so, when her health began to decline, she leaned on her children, never once suspecting that the very people she had sacrificed for would be the ones to betray her. It started with small things: a missing bank statement, a check she swore she hadn't written, strange phone calls that ended as soon as she answered. But Dorothy, ever the trusting mother, brushed them off. Her children were helping her, weren't they? Then one evening, Laura arrived with documents for Dorothy to sign. "Mom, it's just some paperwork to make things easier for all of us," she said with a warm smile. "It's for your protection, so we can take care of everything in case something happens." Dorothy hesitated, but Laura placed a reassuring hand over hers. "You trust me, don't you?" Dorothy, tired and weary from a long day, didn't read the fine print. She trusted Laura, trusted Mark, trusted James. With a shaking hand, she signed. At first, nothing changed. The children reassured her that everything was just as it had been. But then, subtle shifts began happening. Her debit card stopped working. The bills, which she had always paid, were suddenly being handled by Laura. When Dorothy tried to ask questions, Mark would sigh and say, "Mum, don't stress about money. We've got it under control." Then one day she came home to find strangers walking through her house. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice uneasy. James gave her a forced smile. "They're potential buyers, Mom. We're putting the house on the market. It's too big for you now. We found a great retirement community where you won't have to worry about anything." Dorothy's heart pounded. "But I don't want to move. This is my home." "It was your home," Laura corrected gently. "You signed everything over. To us, remember?" The reality hit Dorothy like a crushing weight. They had planned this all along. They had taken everything: her home, her money, her independence. And now they were trying to make her believe it was for her own good. She wasn't even allowed to be angry. But what they didn't realize was that someone was watching. Someone who saw everything. And she wasn't about to let them get away with. Emily had always loved visiting her grandmother. Dorothy's house had been a place of warmth, of fresh-baked cookies and bedtime stories, of laughter that echoed through the halls. But lately, something had changed. The house felt emptier. Dorothy no longer hummed while she cooked, and the spark in her eyes had dimmed. Emily was only 10, but she wasn't stupid. She noticed things that others ignored, like how her grandmother never had her purse with her anymore, or how whenever she tried to talk about money, the conversation was quickly shut down by one of her children. It was during one of these visits that Emily saw her grandmother crying. She had been playing in the living room, flipping through an old book of fairy tales, when she heard a soft sob from the kitchen. Carefully, she peeked around the corner and saw Dorothy sitting at the table, staring at an envelope with trembling hands. Emily frowned. "Grandma!" Dorothy quickly wiped her tears and smiled. "Oh, sweetheart, I didn't hear you come in." Emily climbed into the chair beside her. "Are you sad?" Dorothy hesitated, then sighed. I'm a little tired, that's all." But Emily wasn't convinced. Her eyes darted to the envelope in her grandmother's hands. "What's that?" Dorothy hesitated before sliding it across the table. "It's a letter from the bank," she admitted. Emily took it, her small fingers gripping the paper tightly. She couldn't read every word, but she understood enough. Account closed. Insufficient funds. Her grandmother had no money. But you had money, right?" Emily asked, her voice shaky. "Mom said you were rich." Dorothy swallowed hard. "I thought so too." Emily's stomach twisted. She didn't understand everything about the world of grown-ups, but she knew this wasn't right. Her grandmother had worked her whole life. How could she suddenly have nothing? And then that night she overheard the conversation that changed everything. She had been walking down the hallway when she heard voices coming from the study. The door was slightly open, and inside her mother and uncles were talking in hushed but urgent tones. "She's too old to fight this," Mark was saying. "She doesn't even understand what happened." "She trusts us," Laura added with a laugh. "That's the beauty of it. She signed it all away and she doesn't even realize it." Emily's heart pounded. "But what if she figures it out?" James asked. "She won't. And even if she does, who's going to believe a confused old woman over 3 responsible adults?" Silence. Then laughter. Emily pressed a hand over her mouth to keep from gasping. They had tricked Grandma. They had stolen everything, and they thought they had won. But they had made one mistake. They underestimated her. Emily couldn't sleep that night. The words of her mother and uncles echoed in her mind, twisting her stomach into knots. She trusts us. She signed it all away. Her grandmother had lost everything and they didn't even care. They weren't just cruel, they were proud of what they had done. Lying in bed, Emily clenched her fists. She was only 10, but she knew one thing for sure. This wasn't fair. She had to do something. The next morning, she went straight to her grandmother. Dorothy was sitting in the sunroom, wrapped in a thick shawl, staring out at the garden she had once loved tending to. "Grandma," Emily said softly, pulling a chair close, "did you really sign everything to them?" Dorothy let out a tired sigh. I think so, sweetheart. They told me it was just to make things easier. I didn't want to believe it, but I suppose I was foolish." Emily shook her head fiercely. "You're not foolish. They tricked you." Dorothy gave a sad smile and patted Emily's hand. "That's sweet of you to say, dear, but what's done is done." Emily's heart pounded. "What if it's not done? What if we can prove what they did?" Dorothy chuckled softly, though there was no real joy in it. "And how would we do that?" Emily hesitated. That was the problem. No one believed kids, and no one would listen to her grandmother now, not without proof. But proof existed. It had to. Emily thought about the study where she had overheard the conversation. The house had always been full of old paperwork, locked drawers, and forgotten cabinets. If the crime had been planned, there had to be something, anything that could help. She took a deep breath. "Grandma, I think I can fix this." Dorothy gave her a sad, indulgent smile, as if she were humoring a child's fantasy. Emily didn't argue. She simply stood up, turned toward the study, and prepared to do what no one expected a 10-year-old to do. She was going to uncover the truth. Emily moved quickly, her small footsteps silent against the wooden floors. The study was always locked, but she knew where her Uncle Mark kept the spare key, tucked behind a dusty book on the hallway shelf. Her hands trembled as she fit the key into the lock. Click. The door creaked open, revealing the dimly lit room. Piles of documents sat on the desk, but Emily's eyes went straight to the filing cabinet in the corner. That's where adults kept their important things. She tugged at the handle. Locked. Of course. Her mind raced. Then she remembered something. When she was younger, she had once seen Uncle Mark put a key in the top drawer of the desk. Heart pounding, she pulled the drawer open. Papers, pens, and there it was. A small silver key. She grabbed it, rushed to the cabinet, and turned the lock. The door swung open, revealing rows of folders. Emily didn't know exactly what she was looking for, but she flipped through them quickly, scanning for anything that looked out of place. Bills, property deeds, bank statements. Then she saw it, a will. She pulled it out and opened it, her eyes widening as she read the first line. Last will and testament of Dorothy Reynolds. This was it. The real will, the one her grandmother had before they tricked her. Emily skimmed the page, her heart pounding faster. It clearly stated that Dorothy had full control over her assets. So why had everything changed? Then she saw another document underneath. A new will. Emily compared the signatures. They looked the same, but something felt off. The dates were close together, yet Dorothy had never mentioned changing her will. And then she noticed something even stranger. The notary's signature, barely legible, as if someone had scribbled it. In a rush, Emily gasped. Could it be forged? Before she could think further, a voice cut through the silence. What do you think you're doing? She spun around, her heart stopping as she saw Uncle Mark standing in the doorway. Emily's heart pounded as she faced her Uncle Mark. He stood in the doorway, his sharp eyes narrowing as he took a step closer. What are you doing in here? He asked, his voice dangerously calm. Emily clutched the will behind her back, forcing herself to stay still. I was just looking for some paper, she said, trying to sound innocent. Mark's gaze flicked to the open filing cabinet. His lips curled into a smirk. You shouldn't be snooping, kid. These are grown-up matters. Go on, get out. Emily hesitated, then nodded quickly, slipping the will back into the drawer as if she hadn't understood what she had seen. She walked past Mark, feeling his eyes on her the whole time. Only when she was out of the room did she allow herself to breathe. She had found the proof, but she needed more. As she moved down the hallway, she heard voices from the next room, her mother, Laura, and Uncle James talking in hushed tones. Something told her this was a conversation she needed to hear. Carefully, she took out her phone, turned on the camera, and slid it onto the shelf beside the slightly open door. Mom doesn't even know what happened, James was saying. Laura laughed softly. Of course she doesn't. She trusts us. That's why it was so easy. She thought she was signing something simple, Mark added, now joining them. She never even read the fine print. Emily's stomach twisted in anger. James sighed. And the best part? If she does figure it out, no one will believe her. She's just an old woman. People will think she's confused. Emily's hands clenched into fists, but she forced herself to stay calm. Then Laura said something that made her blood run cold. And if she does make trouble, well, we'll just have to move her somewhere else, maybe a nursing home. Somewhere she won't bother us. Emily's breath caught in her throat. They weren't just stealing from Grandma, they were planning to get rid of her. She snatched her phone and ran. She had what she needed. Now she just had to find a way to make everyone see the truth. Emily's hands trembled as she clutched her phone, her heart racing with excitement and fear. I did it, I have proof, they can't get away with this now. She ran toward her grandmother's room, eager to show Dorothy the truth. But as she rounded the corner, she crashed straight into Mark. Her phone flew from her hands. Mark's reflexes were sharp. He caught it before it hit the ground. Emily froze. His eyes flicked to the screen, still unlocked, where the video file was right there, paused mid-sentence. Slowly, a cruel smile spread across his face. Well, well, he murmured. What do we have here? Emily lunged for the phone, but Mark was faster. He raised it above his head, keeping it out of reach. Give it back, she yelled, her voice high with panic. Mark clicked his tongue. Tsk, tsk. You've been a very bad little girl, Emily. He glanced at the screen, then at her. What exactly were you planning to do with this? Emily swallowed hard. She couldn't let him see how scared she was. I was going to show Grandma, she said, lifting her. Mark let out a sharp laugh. Oh, sweetheart, do you really think anyone would believe a child over 3 responsible adults? Emily clenched her fists. Grandma will, Mark smirked. Guess we'll never know. And before she could react, he tapped the screen and deleted the video. Emily screamed. No! Her fingers scrambled toward him, desperate, but it was too late. The file was gone. To make things worse, Mark dropped the phone to the floor and stomped on it, the sickening crunch echoing through the hallway. Emily stood frozen, staring at the shattered remains of her last hope. Mark crouched down to her level, his voice a whisper. Stay out of this, kid, or you'll regret it. Then, with a final smirk, he walked away, leaving Emily standing there, her whole world crumbling around her. She had lost everything. Or had she? A tiny voice in the back of her mind whispered, Think, Emily, Grandma's computer. Her breath caught. The video might be gone from her phone. But what if it wasn't really gone? Emily's heart pounded as she stared at the shattered phone on the floor. Mark thought he had won, but he had underestimated her. Her mind raced. Grandma's computer. She had heard Dorothy mention it before, how her phone automatically saved photos and videos to the family computer. If that was true, then the video might still be there. But she had to move fast. Mark wasn't the type to take chances. If he suspected she still had a way to expose him, he wouldn't hesitate to act. Emily took a deep breath and darted down the hall, careful to stay out of sight. The office where the computer was kept was just a few doors away. She reached the door and twisted the handle. Locked. Her stomach clenched. No, no, no. She turned, around searching. Dorothy had always been forgetful. Maybe the key was nearby. Then she saw it. Hanging on a small hook near the bookshelf, she grabbed the key, shoved it into the lock, and turned it. The door clicked open. Emily rushed inside and powered on the computer. The screen lit up, displaying a familiar blue login page. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. Password. Her chest tightened. Grandma's passwords were always something sentimental. She glanced around the room, her eyes scanning for clues. There on the desk was a framed photo of Dorothy and her late husband, smiling on their wedding day. Emily bit her lip. Could it be? She typed, Harold 1947, incorrect password. She let out a frustrated breath and tried again. Dorothy, Harold, incorrect. Password. Tears pricked her eyes. She was running out of time. Then she spotted something else, a small decorative plate with a painted picture of Dorothy's first dog, Max. Emily's fingers flew over the keyboard. Maxie boy, login successful. She nearly cried in relief. Quickly, she clicked on the photo library. A loading wheel spun for what felt like forever. And then, there it was, the video. Emily's hands shook as she clicked play. Mark's voice filled the room. She thought she was signing something simple. She never even read the fine print. Emily exhaled sharply. She had it back. But now she had to make sure Mark could never erase it again. She needed to act before he realized his mistake, and she knew exactly how to do it. Emily's fingers trembled as she stared at the screen. The video was safe, but not for long. She knew that Mark wouldn't let this go. The moment he realized she was missing, he'd come looking for her, and if he found her in the office, she had to move fast. Her first instinct was to email the video to someone. But who? Most adults wouldn't believe a kid over 3 well-spoken, manipulative liars. Then she had an idea. She clicked send and emailed the video to Dorothy. Grandma checked her email every morning. If anything happened to Emily, Dorothy would find it. And once she saw the truth with her own eyes, she wouldn't doubt Emily anymore. But that wasn't enough. She needed something more. Something Mark couldn't erase. Emily turned toward the large TV in the living room, the one Dorothy used to watch old movies. If she could connect the computer to the TV and play the video in front of everyone, there would be no way for Mark to talk his way out of it. She grabbed a cable from the drawer and quickly plugged it in, mirroring the screen to the TV. The video file appeared on the giant screen, ready to play. Her heart pounded. She had set the trap. Now she just had to wait for the perfect moment. Minutes later, the family gathered in the living room. Mark, Laura, and James sat comfortably, laughing, sipping wine. They were celebrating their victory over Dorothy. Completely unaware of what was coming, Dorothy sat quietly, her expression distant. She had been feeling weaker lately, exhausted from the stress. Emily stood by the TV, her small hands clenched. Into fists, Mark raised his glass. To new beginnings, Laura smirked. To a future without worries. Emily's stomach churned with anger. She took a deep breath and pressed play. The moment Mark's voice echoed through the room, everything changed. She thought she was signing something simple. She never even read the fine print. Laura's laughter filled the speakers. Of course she doesn't know. She trusts us. That's why it was so easy. Silence. Dorothy's eyes widened. Mark's glass slipped from his hand and shattered on the floor. James shot up from his seat. Turn that off! He lunged for the remote, but Emily was faster. She grabbed it and held it tight. The video continued playing. Every cruel, incriminating word echoed through the house. Dorothy covered her mouth, tears welling in her eyes. Mark turned to Emily, his face twisted in fury. "You little—" But before he could reach her, Dorothy's voice cut through the chaos. "Enough!" She stood up. Her hands trembled, but her voice was stronger than it had been in years. "I heard everything," she said. "You stole from me. You betrayed me," Laura stammered. "Mom, don't call me that." Dorothy's voice shook with anger. "I don't have children anymore." Mark and Laura went pale. James tried to laugh it off. "No one's going to believe some video." Dorothy lifted her chin. "The police will." Emily smiled, because while they had been focused on the TV, she had already sent the video to every single contact in Dorothy's email. The truth was out, and nothing could stop it now. Emily's fingers trembled as she stared at the screen. The video was safe, but not for long. She knew that Mark wouldn't let this go. The moment he realized she was missing, he'd come looking for her. And if he found her in the office, she had to move fast. Her first instinct was to email the video to someone, but who? Most adults wouldn't believe a kid over 3 well-spoken, manipulative liars. Then she had an idea. She clicked send and emailed the video to Dorothy. Grandma checked her email every morning. If anything happened to Emily, Dorothy would find it. And once she saw the truth with her own eyes, she wouldn't doubt Emily anymore. But that wasn't enough. She needed something more, something Mark couldn't erase. Emily turned toward the large TV in the living room, the one Dorothy used to watch old movies. If she could connect the computer to the TV and play the video in front of everyone, there would be no way for Mark to talk his way out of it. She grabbed a cable from the drawer and quickly plugged it in, mirroring the screen to the TV. The video file appeared on the giant screen, ready to play. Her heart pounded. She had set the trap. Now she just had to wait for the perfect moment. Minutes later, the family gathered in the living room. Mark, Laura, and James sat comfortably, laughing, sipping wine. They were celebrating their victory over Dorothy, completely unaware of what was coming. Dorothy sat quietly, her expression distant. She had been feeling weaker lately, exhausted from the stress. Emily stood by the TV, her small hands clenched into fists. Mark raised his glass. "To new beginnings," Laura smirked. "To a future without worries." Emily's stomach churned with anger. She took a deep breath and pressed play. The moment Mark's voice echoed through the room, everything changed. She thought she was signing something simple. She never even read the fine print. Laura's laughter filled the speakers. "Of course she doesn't know. She trusts us. That's why it was so easy." Silence. Dorothy's eyes widened. Mark's glass slipped from his hand and shattered on the floor. James shot up from his seat. "Turn that off!" He lunged for the remote, but Emily was faster. She grabbed it and held it tight. The video continued playing. Every cruel, incriminating word echoed through the house. Dorothy covered her mouth, tears welling in her eyes. Mark turned to Emily, his face twisted in fury. "You little—" But before he could reach her, Dorothy's voice cut through the chaos. "Enough!" She stood up. Her hands trembled, but her voice was stronger than it had been in years. "I heard everything," she said. "You stole from me. You betrayed me," Laura stammered. "Mum, don't call me that." Dorothy's voice shook with anger. "I don't have children anymore." Mark and Laura went pale. James tried to laugh it off. "No one's going to believe some video." Dorothy lifted her chin. "The police will," Emily smiled. Because while they had been focused on the TV, she had already sent the video to every single contact in Dorothy's email. The truth was out, and nothing could stop it now. The room was frozen in stunned silence. Dorothy stood tall, her once trusting eyes now filled with betrayal and fury. Mark, Laura, and James looked like cornered animals, their faces pale as they realized what had just happened. "Mom," Laura tried again, forcing a smile. "You don't understand. We were just—" "I understand perfectly," Dorothy cut her off, her voice steel. "I spent my whole life giving you everything, and this is how you repay me? By lying, stealing, laughing about it?" Mark ran a hand through his hair, forcing a chuckle. "Look, let's just calm down, okay? There's no proof that—" The entire family just watched the proof. Dorothy turned to the guests, who had gathered around, watching in horrified disbelief. The whispers started immediately. They really did that to their own mother. Unbelievable. I always knew they were no good. Laura's confidence shattered. Mum, please, we can fix this. Fix this? Dorothy's voice rose with strength Emily hadn't heard in years. You took my home, you took my money. You tried to lock me away in a nursing home like I was a burden. You don't get to fix this. Then she turned to Emily, her expression softening. Sweetheart, she said gently, can you bring me the phone? Emily handed it over without hesitation. With one deep breath, Dorothy dialed her lawyer. Mark lunged forward. Mom, don't... But Dorothy held up a hand. If you take one more step, I will call the police next. Mark froze. He knew that tone. That was the same voice that had built a business from nothing, raised 3 children alone, and fought through every hardship life had thrown at her. Dorothy Reynolds was not a frail old woman. She was a force, and now she was taking back what was hers. Emily skipped up the steps to her grandmother's house, her real house. Dorothy stood at the door waiting with open arms. Everything had changed since that night. The legal system worked fast when faced with undeniable proof. The fraudulent documents were overturned, and every stolen penny was returned. Mark, Laura, and James had tried to fight, but no judge sided with proven thieves. In the end, they lost everything. Dorothy had cut them out of her life completely. No amount of begging or apologies could undo the damage. Instead, she focused on the one person who had truly been family all along. Emily. Grandma. Emily beamed as she hugged her tight. You're home. Dorothy smiled, stronger than ever. Thanks to you, sweetheart, Emily grinned. I told you I'd fix this. Dorothy laughed, pulling her into another hug. And you did. Then, with a loving squeeze, she whispered, I'm so proud of you. And for Emily, that was the greatest reward of all. What a story, right? Justice was served, but it wouldn't have happened without Emily's courage. If you love emotional stories like this, filled with twists, drama, and unexpected heroes, make sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. That way, you'll never miss another powerful story. Hit the like button if you enjoyed this one and let us know in the comments what you think of Emily's incredible bravery. See you in the next story.